Welcome to I Hate It Here, the podcast for HR and people professionals, making the hardest job in the world just a little bit easier. I'm Hiba Youssef.
It's hard to nail for a variety of different reasons. And I think there are some people who just take for granted that they can show up as their authentic selves and they can just do whatever they need to do. And other people who have been in other workplaces, when they've done that, they've been called, you're angry, you're passive, you're this, you're that. Like, those labels stick with people. And so I think as an HR person, translating the why of how people show up to other people who may not be cognizant of why people are showing up is also on our shoulders a little bit, because it's like, have you thought about that this person actually has this background? Have you thought about how they may have, because there are people who have the privilege of not ever thinking about that at all.
Honestly, what I do for work is probably the least interesting thing about me. And I'm sure some of your employees feel the same way. There's so much more to your employees than just their job titles or what they do day to day. Take Shane in marketing, he's not just about writing emails, or Ashley in HR, she's not just about payroll and benefits. Every employee has a story. They have talents, motivations, and potential waiting to be unlocked. And the predictive index helps you understand them all, not just the role they play. It creates stronger managers, happier teams, and we all know when you truly understand your people, your business actually performs better. Want to learn more? Head over to trypi.com/IHateItHere. Welcome back to another episode of your favorite HR person's favorite podcast. I'm not sure if that worked correctly. I have tried so hard. But I have a treat for you today. Last episode, I talked to my friend Georgia about romance and HR. And no, I don't mean when people find love at work, more about what HR can learn about character development and storytelling from romance novels. And today, I'm going to expand on that a bit more with my dear friend, Tara Turk-Haynes. Tara has over 18 years of experience in talent acquisition, employee engagement, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and was most recently a vice president of diversity, equity, and inclusion. She has dedicated her career to making talent acquisition an equitable program, fostering inclusive workplace environments, and implementing impactful DEI initiatives. Not only that, she has a rich background in the arts, including playwriting, screenwriting, and fiction. And I thought she would be the perfect guest to talk all things storytelling with. So Tara, welcome back to the pod.
I am so excited to talk about this. This is going to be incredible.
Well, I had to talk to my audio team before we recorded because they asked us not to sing on this podcast. So.
That is their loss. That is okay.
If you did
this with everyone, that's fine. Right.
If you did not hear Tara's wish for 2025, we did record an episode about our 2025 wishes, and maybe I might have sang a little bit, and I really need to stop. It's getting out of control. I basically am pretending I'm Justin and In Sync, where I can like actually sing and I should be the star, but everyone knows JC was the better singer. So,
oh, not even debatable.
I know. He was literally robbed. Justice for JC. For another episode, we should talk about teamwork through the lens of In Sync.
Oh, my goodness. Actually, we could do a lot of the bands, because if we kind of think about it, if you go through all of the 80s bands, there was somebody who was robbed.
Yeah. Also, like, I'm, little 90s baby. So, like, NSYNC and Backstreet Boys were, like, my frame of reference. But in the Backstreet Boys, I was, like, a Nick Carter fan through and through. He really was it for me. Yeah. And I don't think he was, like, the cute one. Oh, and also Spice Girls. They all played, like, a role. Anyways, that's a podcast for another day.
Right. I was going straight New Edition, but yes, I got you.
Okay. I also love New Edition. Okay. Before we get to the actual bulk of this episode, I've been asking every guest this season, what's one area or topic that has been really interesting to you right now? Like an area you've dove into or you've just found fascinating recently?
I think that it's surprising to me how many leaders cannot translate the business to their regular employees. Like, I think they probably do it really well in C-suite because they're talking to each other. So it's like an echo chamber. But if you were to ask a CEO to tell the marketing coordinator, like, this is, you know what I mean, to the basic person. And I think those are the people who are probably closest to your consumers, you know what I mean, your customers, and we should probably be better at that.
I love that you took it to an HR example. What else is interesting to you right now? I've been telling everybody it does not even need to be HR related.
So I went to the Magic Castle last night in Los Angeles, and some people may know it, but it's a members only. It used to be a house in the turn of the century, and they turned it into a club in the 60s for magicians. And we were guests. Like, it's so exclusive. You need to be invited, or you need to find out how you can get guest passes and pay. But we were guests of longtime members, and there's a section for each different kind of magic. There's parlor magic. There's I'm obsessed now because I didn't realize how obsessed I would be. We saw 4 incredible shows. It was something I've never even experienced in my entire life. And now I need to know everything about magic.
When you texted me Magic Castle, I was like, is that...
Let's talk about that later.
Well, I was like, I thought it was a euphemism for something else. So I was like, right? Okay, can't wait to hear what the Magic Castle is.
One of the magicians actually told an not for safe for work story about he's from Ecuador, and he basically said for 3 years he was telling his friend, he moved here to do magic, and he was telling a friend who was not in magic for 3 years that he was going to Magic Castle, but he said he did not enunciate the C. So his friend for 3 years was like, "Excuse me, I have a question."
You've been going where now? I swear. You texted me Magic Castle, and I was like, yep, she'll tell me about this later. I didn't even bat an eye.
You didn't. You did not. You didn't. Normally I get a little exclamation reaction. I didn't even get it. So I'm obsessed now. It's an exclusive club, so I don't even know how we're going to get in so I can see more stuff. I saw the boyfriend to one of that was on Abbott Elementary, who,
Tariq.
No, not her boyfriend.
I love Tariq.
The other boyfriend, the one, oh gosh, everybody's name escapes me. Going through perimenopause right now.
I love that I'm just shouting out names of characters from Abbott Elementary because I'm like, which boyfriend? I must know the actor.
It was a gay couple. It was last season, and they broke up.
Zach.
Yes. So the boyfriend.
Yeah.
He was there, and I was like, "You look so familiar." And he had an Abbott Elementary button on. You can't take pictures.
Dead. You just walked up, and you were like, "You look so familiar."
He didn't. Listen, this brain. Let me tell you. But you can't take pictures because you'll get kicked out. They'll make you disappear. That's what they said. So, it was amazing, and it looks like the castle from Harry Potter. I almost got lost a few times.
Okay, so you said the Magic Castle, and I was like, this is just so aligned because if you were to ask me something that I'm really interested in right now, it's Harry Potter fan fiction, and I can't stop talking about Harry Potter fan fiction because it's made me rethink everything I thought about the original Harry Potter stories. And we can get into that in a second because we are talking about storytelling today.
Storytelling.
So I'm going to bury this because I think it's going to come up again. Yes. Okay. So storytelling. Last episode, I talked to my friend Georgia, who's an author, and you, Tara, also wrote a play recently and had it show. I don't know if that was the right word. You're a phenomenal storyteller. I watch you do it all the time. And also, I just love talking to you. So I just wanted to make this episode about that because I think it's integral to how we connect as humans. So let's start there. Why do you think storytelling is so important to how we build connections?
Because it reveals who we are as people in a really organic way. And if you even think about at work, what other opportunities do you have to kind of talk about yourself except through storytelling? Because we're so tactical and we're so project oriented at work, but you never get to understand who's the person that you're working next to, what's important about them, what should you know? And a lot of times they could be short stories, which, if you're a writer, that's probably the hardest. You know that, short, hey, tell me a story in 30 seconds. You're like, okay. But people do it all the time at work and we don't even recognize it. So I think the way that we tell, information about how we are, who we are, how we show up, something about your food, something about your hair that day, something about what you're wearing, the t-shirts you have, all of those are stories and we should appreciate those more.
Yeah, I feel sometimes I get Like I was driving somewhere recently and I made a playlist and I was driving with somebody, and every artist that came up, when she was like, oh, I like this song, I'd be like, oh, let me tell you about this thing that they did that's really cool. And I would be telling stories about every single one of these songs. And by the end of the car ride, she was like, I did not realize you were like this passionate about music.
Yes.
And I was like, I didn't even realize I was doing it. Like, but like
Yeah.
every single song, I like wanted to tell her the story of like how why the artist wrote the song and why it's my favorite song and what it does here. And I was just like gabbing away. And by the end of the ride, she was like, you just have a story for like every one of your favorite artists.
Yes.
And I was like,
it builds
I
connection,
guess so.
right? Like it really, it helps you connect to the thing. Stories help you connect. And there's nothing that replaces that.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine an environment. I mean, I have worked in an environment where I have been so disconnected, like this storytelling aspect just been so gone. Like I just didn't want to talk to anybody, didn't connect with anybody. And I realized like back in that environment, it was like because I didn't trust a lot of those people to hear any of my stories.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You take great care of yourself. And like, what even stories do you tell even in that environment? Because we're still telling stories, right? But it's just a matter of also understanding, and even from my day-to-day work from DE&I, like, how do I get to know other people's lived experiences if I'm not hearing their stories?
Yeah. But I think sometimes I think it's really hard to be vulnerable. Like I think being a storyteller means like being vulnerable about something. And I think a lot of people struggle with that in the workplace.
I think that people who are marginalized have an ability to tell stories that don't make them so vulnerable. You could tell a very surface level story and still not share yourself, right? Because you are guarded, right? So you know which stories to tell where, but we're always still telling them, which is really interesting to me.
So fascinated by this topic, honestly, because I think about it all the time. I did my first like storytelling night where I told the story of like losing my father, and I was like so emotional while doing it, and it was so tough. And each story that was told, I felt like I deeply connected to the person telling the story. And when you look at storytelling or think about storytelling, what makes a story truly resonate with the person?
I think that it's authenticity. And one of the things that I did pre-pandemic was I started doing moth type storytelling. I got roped into it. Somebody was just like, could you do it? And I was like, oh my God, I didn't want to do it. And the story that I told was about, I had a stalker in New York, which was pretty scary when I was in college. And and I think when you decide to tell a story like that, when you decide to share your true emotions going through that moment, you relive it yourself. And I think people really connect to that moment where you're reliving and all of your emotions and how you feel. And I think that helps people connect and empathize and also relate it to a moment where they felt the same. So when we're authentic and we're able to really find that combination of words that express how we feel to the best of our ability, right? Because I'm one of those writers that's like, nothing is ever done. I'm always going to be like, no, it's not finished. No, it's not finished. You're striving for perfection. But the journey towards that is about chipping away, finding the right word combination that allows someone to go, I have felt that feeling before, or oh my goodness, I don't want to feel that feeling, or I do want to feel that feeling. But you're doing such a job of creating a world for somebody to step into. And I think that's pretty powerful. A lot of people cannot do that.
Yeah. I mean, I watched people in the audience like cry as I was telling my story. Yeah. And I was like, fuck, I can't.
Who else? Like, who can't? You know what I mean? Losing a loved one is just one of those moments where if we think about it, everybody has gone through it. And to share that story, it connects us in a way that lets us know, especially if we're talking about grief or love or these big, big emotions that we have, you're not alone. And I think that's what's really important is when we go through those emotions, sometimes we do feel like we are alone.
Yeah. And I just remember like earlier in my career, there was this idea that a leader had to be like God, what's the word I'm looking for? Like so tough and not vulnerable at all. Yeah. Remember like it was like the leaders are strong. They don't talk about their feelings. They don't cry at work, like all these things. And I remember coming up through the time and watching these leaders and just thinking to myself, like, that one, I don't know if that will ever be me. Like I'm somebody who cries when I get emotional and I find like tears to be beautiful. And I'm like, hey, like there's so much sadness. There's this beautiful, beautiful quote I heard recently that was like, the people who have felt like the deepest sadnesses also can feel like true happiness to a different extent than everyone else, because they have felt these like deep sadness. And I remember thinking like being vulnerable was like not a leadership norm. And now I feel like it is.
I feel like it's harder to be vulnerable. Just like when people say, for example, comedy is easy. Comedy is not easy. It's literally the hardest thing you can do, because to make someone laugh, those deep emotions, right, are not easy. But I think that, and I was thinking about this the other day, I think leaders back in the day, that whole Jack Welch school of leadership is we were talking about how your work is family, right? So that means that you think the leader is your parent, and you want your parent to feel like they have everything under control. So if they show up and they're emotional, then you're like, oh, like are we in trouble? So that it cascades down. So those leaders decided to just put the wall up. But I think the opposite actually happens, where it's a matter of not understanding that. How do we access the ability to aspire to leadership or ascend to leadership if we don't know that it's challenging, it's tough, it's beautiful, it's a gift, it's not a gift, you're blamed for everything, you're kudos for everything, like all of these different things. I think I didn't really understand that to the extent, because I was at work at 9/11, and I remember all of those leaders just being like, I don't know what we're doing. Like, this is crazy, like, oh no. Yeah. But DDA from Culture Amp, their CEO, I was at a conference for culture conference, and he was talking about leadership in a way, because a CEO is going to see like the pain points of leadership, and I was like, okay, give me a break, like you make 7 figures probably, whatever, like 6 figures maybe. Yeah. The way he told his story, I was like, oh my gosh, how lonely is that? How exciting is that? How powerful that is? How scary is that? Because he told his story in a way that allowed us to access empathy for someone who has a lot of responsibility and still call themselves a leader, but also is super vulnerable about the sucky parts of it, and not in a way where you're just like eye rolling.
It's excellent storyteller. So like back to like, you can't be a good storyteller if you're not vulnerable and you're not authentic. And I think there is every day in society, people trying to tell you how to be and what to look like and what to believe. And I think there's something deeply beautiful about being vulnerable as a leader and finding your own path to leadership that like works for you.
I think we're moving towards a world where you can actually tell when people are being super fake about their storytelling.
Yeah.
And I think about like the news now, like where you see, congressional hearings where they're just like going back and forth, and this fake outrage and and I think they don't understand that people connect to the fact that you're being fake rather than your story, right? So we're like, really, you want to, catch somebody outside because they called you a child, because it's like slang, you know what I mean? Like all these different kinds of things where we're just not having serious performative conversations, but we're using story in such a false way that it's almost like insulting for people who actually do craft narratives and stories. We're like, that's just like, that's just a bad story. Like you could just get somebody to help you with this story. There are people out there who can help you. This is a terrible, terrible, you're just like, cancel this season, just start over, get some other writers. I don't know. Like, this is not working for you. Not working for you.
On the note of, you said cancel that season and start all the writers, you watched The Bear, right?
Oh my God. Yes.
So this last season was a very interesting season where fans were like kind of upset with the season because they felt like the story wasn't going anywhere, like Carmi wasn't evolving. And I read this take. God, I wish I could remember where I read this. And I thought it was so interesting. And I thought about it for so long. I think I texted you about this too, where they were saying like the story is meant to like frustrate the audience because what's happening is like everybody else is developing and Carmi is staying the same. And the story ultimately is about him. And so they used storytelling to convey this feeling of being stuck. And then to watch all the audience people be like, oh, this season was like so slow, like nothing happened. I felt like we weren't moving. And I like connected to that because that's how I felt. And then I read the take and I was like, oh my God, they like wrote the story like this. This is what they intended for us to feel like at the end of the season.
I think I was the opposite. My take was that, like fine dining, which you and I love. we
love a good dinner. Love a good dinner.
We love a good dinner. It was the precision and the slow, methodical. Like if you've ever watched 5-star chefs put anything together, it's not fast. It's literally just like you're building, creating, starting over, building, creating, starting over. And that's what that season felt like for me, building, creating, starting over. But if you're not that artist that's creating, everyone around you gets frustrated because they're like, what are you doing? If you're even like taking it even back to writing, right? If you are trying to write something that you feel like you're really passionate about and it's just coming out slower than usual, right? You get frustrated. If you've got deliverables, people around you are getting frustrated, but there's still something that's happening, right? I was telling someone the other day, a really good friend of mine just finished a screenplay she's been working on for 6 years. And she's like, finally. And I was like, but babe, creativity cannot be rushed, because if you do rush it, it's going to look like it. You're not going to be happy. So you've got to massage whatever you need to do. But I think that, it's really hard to do what the bear did in that moment, in that season, to slowly develop in a way that because we didn't stop watching it. Like it was still just like, it's a different pace. And I think I wish more shows would do that, show us different paces, especially because I'm a fan of, I don't know if you saw that SNL movie, but I love that kind of real time, stress me out, anything that happens in the moment. It's my favorite.
Well, you should watch Industry because I love that show. And the 3rd season has this episode featuring Rishi, the main character. And the episode itself put me on an edge for hours after, because it was such a rush of a run. It was like I felt like I was running a marathon in this episode. So much was happening in his highs and his lows. I felt like were my highs and my lows. And it was such a change of pace from like TV that I don't know if anyone watches Industry, that episode, I think of like the best episodes of TV I've ever seen, where I literally left and I continued thinking about them. There's another episode of Lost in season 3. I think it's the Constant episode. It's such an interesting form of writing where there's like time and flashbacks, and then you get to the end and you realize like what's actually happening. I think about that episode of TV a lot, and that was like 15 years ago. So
I think about 6 Feet Under, the finale of 6 Feet Under, which is one of my favorite episodes of all time. I remember like hysterically crying for like a week after. I'm like, I can't believe I'm crying over this episode.
Me when Shonda Rhimes killed Derek in Grey's Anatomy. I was like, Shonda, you're about to get an email from me, lady. I had to cry. I cried through 2 paper towels.
Shonda is an excellent
what a storyteller. What a storyteller.
But what I love, and I've seen her like speak and read her book, she's very methodical about it. She's not like, there's a lot of people, my friends who are writers and I are always talking about different personalities of writers. And some are just like, I'm so like granola, I'm hippie, I feel it. When I feel it, I'm feeling it. And Shonda is literally just like, she calls it like laying track. Like she's always laying train tracks. Like you got to keep the story moving. So she's always thinking about keep it moving, keep it moving, keep it moving, keep it moving, keep it moving. And she's so good at that. She does not romanticize the artistry. She's not like lounging around sort of like thinking deep thoughts. It's just like keep that story pushing. And it's more like real life, I think, than anything.
Yeah. And we're talking about how all these stories make us feel. And there is a relation to HR. For anyone listening, I hope you're having a good time. But I swear, because I think about how these storytellers make us feel. And then I think like we in HR are the artists of feelings at work. We craft an experience for everyone to feel it. We tell stories in a way that I hope connects the employees to like our broader mission, connects them to us. And so I think whenever HR people are like, what are skills that you think HR people need? I'm like, creativity and curiosity. If you have both of those in HR, then you have basically a blank canvas, and we're the Van Gogh of it all. Like we're going to be the painters who are going to create something, hopefully, as long as we have like the alignment with the CEO. But that's a separate episode.
100%. I think there's also a level of accountability too, right? Because like artists have an accountability towards the characters in the stories that they create, and I think HR people should have the same. Because I think sometimes, there is this element of prioritizing methodical, tactical. But if you realize how you're connecting to that person and how you can be accountable to that person, and then you're using your creativity, and then you're using that curiosity to develop further and further, it's almost like researching for any story that you're going to tell, any story, because every story requires some level of research.
Yeah. And I also think like we have a deep responsibility. I have met so many employees who have been like hurt by previous HR teams. And so when they get to me in my environment, I say this so often, like I already feel like I'm starting from the negative. But then I think like that makes my job it makes me feel like so much more responsibility for my job.
Yes.
That like I want to positively impact this person. So when they leave and go to a different company, they say like, oh, my last HR team was great. And this HR team like could be great too.
Mm-hmm. I think that there's an ability to also hold space for other people's stories as well. And a lot of HR teams, I think the ones that we're talking about, the ones who affect people in a way that's not positive, probably didn't hold space for those stories in a way that made you feel responsible for them, right? So people just want to be heard, and they want to be heard at work so that they can feel like they're connected to the overall mission. So how do you hold space for that? And it doesn't have to be laborious. Like you're not, taking on somebody's whole life, but it is challenging because everyone is different, right? So how do you hold space for every person?
I don't know. You said hold space, and all I could think of was defy gravity. My brain has we're gonna get in trouble. We were told no singing, so I will not sing. A job title doesn't define who someone is. There's so much more to someone's story than what they do for work. In fact, I often say what I do for work is probably the least interesting thing about me. And I bet some of your employees may feel the same. Jamie in IT, she's not just about fixing tickets. And Mike in sales, he's more than hitting quotas. Every employee has a story. Every employee has talents, motivations, and potential waiting to be unlocked. And that's where the predictive index comes in. PI helps you understand the whole person, creating stronger managers and happier teams. And we all know when you truly understand your people, your business can actually perform better. Check out trypi.com/IHateItHere to learn more. But on the note, we touched on like some of our favorite stories, but I have to know, is there a story that has just stayed with you over the years? And why do you think it's resonated so deeply with you?
When I was in grade school, there's two stories because they connected to me to how I felt like I could be a writer. So the first story is we got to go see a play, which I'd never seen a play before, because we're in grade school and it's Detroit and it's predominantly Black. And like, I don't know. It's just was not part of our culture of artistry that we kind of did a lot. But it was an all Black cast, which I was like, holy smokes, like I've never seen that before. And it was like a parody on stories from the Bible. And there was an Adam and Eve story, and there was a joke, and the joke was Eve says, "Adam, do you love me?" And Adam says to her, "Of course, Eve, I love you. You're my one and only because you're my only one." And I thought that was the funniest thing that I had ever heard in my life. And I went home and I told everybody on my block and my house, like, I was like, "Isn't that hilarious?" And they're like, "Okay, great. Can you get better at storytelling?" But I was like, you had to be there. It was so funny. But I always remember that because I'm like, that is hilarious. But a lot of my stories are also about my reaction to seeing things. Another story when, again, 8th grade, I think, so the two popular high schools in Detroit are Cass Technical High School. A lot of famous people went there, performers, and mine, which was Renaissance, which is the nerd school. And we were also
a lot of famous people like you went there.
There are some famous people that go there, but yes, not me, but yes. And so, but Cass had was all performing arts. I mean, we're talking like Diana Ross went there, like big school. They came and they did Fame for us. Now, I was a lover of Fame. Let me tell you how I was just like, I'm like mushed myself. I could be like Coco, and then one day I could be like, it was just all, and Janet Jackson. And I was like, oh my gosh, like the movie to the TV show, like obsessed. This felt so bad. This group came, and first of all, the Leroy was not the Leroy that we're thinking Leroy, you're going to cast close to what the show and the movie looks like. This was not. I'm not going to describe why, but it was just not Leroy. And the scene where the knife falls out of his sort of belt, it was a foil knife. And you can't, and I realized 8th graders are mean, because we were like, is that foil? They lost us. Like, we literally, the whole show, we were gone. And I think I paid attention to because they were performing like we are doing this amazing musical. And we were like fixated on the execution of it, right? And for 8th graders, in my mind, I was like, whenever I write, I go, how are they going to tear this? Like, how can people tear this apart? What am I missing? Right? How can I not have a foil knife that's going to fall and have the kids like laughing because they're like, this is so ridiculous. Right? So like, you have to be able to, I think for me, it taught me like, how do I account for the like what might be inevitable? How do I explain it? How do I give some voice to that so that you're not continuing on and just being like, don't pay attention to the foil knife. This is a big, musical. No, they're going to pay attention to the foil knife. It's a detail. It's something that connected all of us, where we're just like, nope, you've lost us. I don't care how well you sing. None of that. It doesn't matter. The foil knife lost us.
I always think about the employee comms from that perspective too. Whenever I'm reading, I tell our leaders, like, if you are a leader at a company, you are being watched under a microscope. Yes. They are looking for the foil knife all the time. Yes. They're looking at your actions. They're looking at your reactions. Like, there's a part of leadership that is just like inherently more responsibility. We all know. But the part that I think is hard for a lot of people is like, the employees are going to be holding you to a different standard, whether or not they say it. And so like, then your actions become so much more important. And when I write my employee comms too, I'm like, what are questions that are going to come up? Like, if I was an employee, what questions would I ask? So I always write it, and then I go read it from like the lens of an employee, because I worry about all our initiatives falling flat if I'm not thinking through who is the audience at the end receiving this message.
That's exactly what it is. And like, even so for me, even at that age, it's a matter of just like, how are people going to the first story? How are people going to translate the story when they tell it to somebody else? Right. And how are people going to account for, like, you're so proud of the thing, but the thing might be flawed. So how are you making allowances for that? And so even as someone who uses like storytelling and DE&I and talent acquisition, which, I've done a lot, employee engagement, my regular writing, like, how do I account for those things? Because it's going to come up. Like, it always comes up, and people are going to ask the most basic question. I had a play called If Eve Left, and it was so I thought, ooh, I'm so creative. It's like, it's a take on three couples who had challenges as couples, and then it blew up, right? The relationships blew up under stress. And I did a Q&A afterwards, and this man was like, so when did Eve leave? And I was like, yes, I was trying to be creative with this title, but this sir, you called me out. Like, I get
This
it.
man said, I am ready with a Q&A question.
My question was, when did Eve leave? And I'm like, okay, yeah, well, and sometimes you're not always going to have like the best answer for them. Sometimes people are just not going to connect the dots, but be prepared for that. Like, you just have to be prepared for that.
Absolutely. Okay, so now let's talk a bit more. We've like touched on this a little bit about like storytelling, HR. I want to talk like deeper into the HR. I mean, we've shared all of our favorite stories, but like now the HR part, like how I think like stories often reveal a lot of truth about people, society, the world.
Yeah.
How do you think that applies in the workplace?
So when I first got my role overseeing DEI and talent, one of the things that I led with was education, because we were in a remote setting. It was right during the pandemic. How are we going to stay connected to each other? And infinitely believe that stories connect us. So some of the DEI programs that we had, I was insistent that we would always have one or two employees from our company on the panel, because like, how else are we going to know people? And sometimes they were like dragged kicking and screaming onto the panel. They're like, I don't want to.
Told.
I don't want to do it. I'm specifically thinking about like our Black History Month one that I did. We had one employee and I asked him and he was just like, I will do it, but I'm not technically like African American. I'm African. And I was like, yes, 100%. Like you still should participate. And we had 3 different people, along with my really good friend Yvette Nicole Brown, who is a masterful storyteller in terms of like her artistry and what she does as an actress and activist, tell different perspectives of the Black experience in general. And so the one employee who was African, he actually broke down because he was Nigerian. So he led with my tribe, my, Yoruba, like all of these other things, as opposed to being like Great Migration, which we do have. And then we have other people who are Caribbean, you know what I mean? Like Caribbean, Black. How did we all get here? And that was a theme of most of our observance panels after that, where once we did that one, other cultures in our organization felt comfortable enough to say, this is how here's how my family got here, right? And this is how this shows up for me. Some of them way more comfortable than others. Some people who were like, I had one for Asian American Heritage Month, and he was like, I never even thought about this, to be honest with you. On the panel, he's like, I was so conditioned to not think about my identity in this way that it never even occurred to me. So I think it was so powerful for so many people. And then how that translated is even the quietest people who, we're all on a Zoom, you're on mute, blah, 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 whatever. Afterwards, in my one-on-ones with people, they felt comfortable enough to trust me with their stories because we normalized storytelling as an identity for the people that we were working next to. So we learned so much about people in that short amount of time. And I do believe that we transformed I think that kept the company together during the pandemic. I'll just, toot my own horn. I don't think we did anything else that allowed us to feel connected like we did in those moments.
I mean, storytelling builds empathy. Like you end up having empathy for other people. And I talked about this in my episode last week with Georgia, that I think part of the reason I'm so good at this HR job is because my lifelong thing was like, I was a reader. I was always reading other people's stories. And I was always fascinated about why does this person behave this way? And how did they end up in this situation? And how did they navigate it? And what does it mean if you have a different personality and like conflict, don't like conflict? And I think because of that, I've just built this like deep empathy for the experience of others. And also, I can't lie, I was othered myself growing up very often. And so I felt lonely a lot of the times and like I didn't belong. And I think that made me even more cognizant in the workplace. Like if someone doesn't feel like they belong, it really does impact like their mental health, their ability to do good work. And what is my role as HR if not to create a space, hopefully, where people feel like they belong, even though that's really hard to nail.
100%. It's hard to nail for a variety of different reasons. And I think there are some people who just take for granted that they can show up as their authentic selves and they can just do whatever they need to do. And other people who have been in other workplaces, when they've done that, they've been called, you're angry, you're passive, you're this, you're that. Like those labels stick with people. And so I think as an HR person, translating the why of how people show up to other people who may not be cognizant of why people are showing up is also on our shoulders a little bit, because it's like, have you thought about that this person actually has this background? Have you thought about how they may have, because there are people who have the privilege of not ever thinking about that at all.
Yeah. I had one of my earliest bosses, I've told this story, I usually tell it like once a year on LinkedIn because I feel like it's a helpful story. One of my earliest bosses told me not to wear my hair curly in the office because it looked messy and I looked unprofessional when I showed up with my hair not straight.
Yep.
So then I proceeded to straighten my hair for 10 years. I literally would get a blowout every week, would make it last, never naturally wore my hair naturally, honestly, until the pandemic. in like 2020 is when I stopped getting my blowouts and wearing my hair curly more. And I just remember thinking like for 10 years, I did not show up to work without straight hair.
Yeah.
And
Hair
all
is
because
political. Right.
somebody convinced me that I looked unprofessional and messy with this. And
Yep.
and I would show up like, okay, let me make sure like my skirts are long enough. My there's no sexifying of my body. Like all these things and thoughts I went through every single day before I went to work. And I honestly think about the thought that like maybe somebody doesn't have every single one of those thoughts when they go to work, and like that's a privilege, but I want to create a space where people don't feel like they have to filter through 10 things to show up, just to show up.
Well, I think that that's the thing too, is just like, how do we connect the storytelling? I mean, that's literally why we have the Crown Act, right? Because the people most impacted by hair politics tend to be Black and brown women in general. And these are things that some people are just like, why do you, whenever we post about the Crown Act on LinkedIn, there's at least 60% of the people who are like, why is this a work conversation? It's because it has shown up at work, because we are the only ones who are policed about what we look like in terms of our hair in a way that's quote unquote unprofessional, which is something we've never collectively defined, but we are scrutinized against.
Yeah. I mean, like, I wear my hair curly proudly now. Actually, it's funny when I go to conferences, I usually wear my hair straight just because it's easier to not travel with all of my hair stuff.
Right.
But people are always like, "Oh, I like really wanted to see your hair curly," and I'm like, "What a time to be alive that my hair has been a talking piece."
I think this is why I love getting my hair braided, and it being so very distinctly African origin in terms of like what it looks like, because I want that conversation to be front and center. I don't want ever to have to pretend I'm somebody else. People should know what they're getting. And so I love being able to say like, this is what this can look like. And it's always, like I have an incredible hair braider, now impacted by the Altadena fires, but she's going to be fine. But that's artistry right there. And that's like how we force the issue. Like we don't have to pretend, we don't hide ourselves at work. And that's a story. And I think even hair is a story, right? Like how we got our hair is a story. So telling that, being able to show up and being open to that conversation, especially in workplaces, is so important to me.
Yeah, it's like I would never, if someone showed up with like any sort, I would never comment on someone's hair. I just would never. I'm like, I don't have any rights to comment on that person. Like, in what reality would I find it appropriate to make a comment about someone's hair?
Literally connecting it to the basics. I've never commented on anyone's toupee.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I could give a straight face when you said that.
We don't comment on your toupee.
My eyes twitching.
Even when it's obvious, we don't comment on it.
I'm just not. It's not for me.
So let me do me. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, let me do me.
For me. So we'll see. Back. God, Tara, I could talk to you forever. Okay. Now we need to give people maybe a little bit of advice. I don't know. How can HR professionals become better storytellers? So someone listening to this podcast probably works in HR. If you don't work in HR, well, why are you listening to this? Can you tell me? Can you tell me? Because I'm actually a little curious as to why you're listening. But if someone in HR is like, I hear what they're saying, I get it. I also love stories, but I'm a terrible storyteller. How can someone in HR become a better storyteller?
Take a writing class. Like, you know how CEOs back in the day, this was a big thing where they were just like, I'm going to do a stand-up. I'm going to do a stand-up class so I can tell better stories verbally or whatever. I don't know what that, like, stand-up is hard. So listen, kudos to you if you're going to do stand-up. I will never. Honestly, I will never. But because I had to take acting and to graduate and get my master's degree. And I'm like, this is it for me. I'm never doing this again. But take a writing class. I think if it's also less traumatizing, so you're not on stage. But I think being able to dissect the why of a story, who's your audience, what are you trying to convey? Even if not like a creative writing class, journalism will skin you alive. We all know this. Like the journalists have the very thickest of skins, and I think
how they do it.
Listen. I think if you want to crash course, I would definitely take a journalism class, because you will embrace the fine art of editing to the point where you actually are telling the critical story as well. I think it's so valuable to be able to do that. But then if you start like watching news shows, or if you start watching your favorite show, start asking questions about like, how did we get to the, if we're talking about the Bear, how did we get to this season? Like, let's work backwards, reverse engineer things. Some people love to take things apart in that way, but start thinking about it not just as an audience member or the reader, but maybe as the creator, right? Because if you're an HR person, I think being able to have that skill set, because even in talent acquisition, I told people my ability to write and my experience as a journalist helped me ask better interview questions.
Mm-hmm.
So, because I wasn't like, this is the formula. I was like, what is the answer I'm trying to get to? What do I want to know from this person? Let me work it backwards so I can get to that answer, right? So let me develop questions that allow me to actually walk away from this interview and say, I got a good sense of who this person is. Okay, yeah, let's make a decision here.
I love that. I was just going to say, like, I'm obsessed with pop culture, TV, movies. We know this, but like, imagine you're the showrunner of your show. Your role in HR is you are the showrunner of the company. Like, think about that as every story. And like, there are so many opportunities in HR to practice being a better storyteller, from how you give company updates to when somebody gets hired to when you're onboarding someone to developing something. Like, every single opportunity is a chance to tell a story as to why it's happening the way that it is.
Yeah. And if you have a marketing team or if you have a comms team, you need to partner with them in ways that are outside of their norm, like not just for the external facing portion of the company, but internally. Like, I think partnering with them is so valuable because you want to be able to use those creative efforts internally as well. That's all about storytelling as well.
I love that. Okay, so I want to talk about, so we just talked a little bit about storytelling. What are some storytelling mistakes people may make, and how can they avoid them?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that I think people don't go back to the basics of storytelling, and I think starting complex. And I'll give it a quick example. We used to do these monthly company-wide meetings, and for a while, they weren't working, because some parts of them, when finance comes on or legal comes on, I'm like, it just glosses
you and everyone else.
Yeah. Like, what are you talking about? And when I finally got in a position to sort of influence some of that, I was like, I'm going to tell you a quick thing. I would guess that 60% of our company has no idea what EBITDA is. Because you keep using it and people are too afraid to ask the question. I don't know what that is. And so when you start talking, like, I want you to, if you're presenting, I want you to present in a way that saves time, that's impactful for employees. How can you tell this story in a way that's like basic? Like, can you explain it to your parents, right? Like, can you explain it to your friends? Will your friends be like, girl, what is that? One of my favorite scenes, and we didn't get to talk about this, but I think Cast, Isabel Wilkerson's book, is such an amazing way to tell stories, nonfiction, that connect us all. But the movie Origin literally is one of my, I can't ever watch it again because it destroyed me. But when Niecy Nash's character is talking to Ingenue, it's her cousin, and her cousin is just, girl, I'm a nurse. I go to work at, these people driving me crazy, The character of Ingenue is Isabel Wilkerson, who is a highly acclaimed journalist in New York Times, Washington Post, talking about the concept of caste and how that relates to the Black community. And Niecy is just like, girl, can you say that? Like, tell me in a way that just like, we're at a barbecue. Like, they're literally at a barbecue. Tell me in a way that allows me to understand exactly what you're talking about. When she finally does that, she goes, well, she's outraged. So the power of being able to know your audience and speak to them in a way that resonates. And one of the things I learned in theater was you've got to talk to your audience in a way that they receive it rather than the way that you want to tell it.
Yep. Oh, that's such a good tip, because when I used to work at Axios and they talked about how they developed like smart brevity, they always used to say, I think it was like a Mike Allen story. He used to say, like, imagine you're going to a bar and you have like a few seconds to, like, you see your friend at the bar, you have a few seconds to catch up with them before you can do anything else. And like, what are you going to tell them?
Yeah.
Are you going to start a long-winded story? No, you're going to get straight to the point. And so I think about that a lot with employee comms. I'm like, don't bury things in the middle. If you're doing something, start with telling them why. Why
Yes.
are we doing this? Why is this happening? And the one mistake I think a lot of people make is they say it once and they think it lands.
Oh, yes.
And
That's
I'm like,
such a good one.
what is it, like 5 to 7 times before someone processes something? But I also think that means you can't just do the same 5 to 7 times. It can't just be the same 3 talking points. It's like
Mhm.
do an all hands about it. Have your managers talk to them.
Yeah.
Host a fireside chat. Do this, do that. Like it's going to need to be said multiple times for it to actually land properly.
Yes, you've got to anchor the message. You've got to anchor the message. And even going back to what you just said, like any writer or filmmaker in LA is going to tell you, like if you're doing a pitch for a show or a project, you've got 30 seconds to pitch that person who
We are the attention.
is going to be like, why should I care about this? And they're harsh. Like they literally will just be like, no, this is a dumb idea. That's why when you go into pitch meetings, they're like, have 5, because the first one that you think this is golden. If you only go in there with one, you're screwed, because they're like, well, thanks for meeting with me. And you may never meet that person again. Your employees are exactly the same way. You don't have a long runway with them in terms of like the why, and connecting the why to why you're doing things.
Sometimes I'll write a really long comms and then I'll be like, God, this is so long. Who's going to read this? I'll go into ChatGPT and I'll say, make this more concise. I will literally drop what I write. I said, give me 3 to 5 sentences and make it more concise. And then I look at what ChatGPT spits out and I'm like, okay, this is better. Like this is exactly what people need to know. So like, don't be afraid to leverage AI tools to help you get a message across in a more direct manner.
And another way I use ChatGPT is when I write something, I go, what am I missing if I'm a new hire? What am I missing if I've never, because it won't always be perfect, but you're asking another resource to give you a perspective of what you might be missing if your goal is X, Y, Z. If my goal is this, what am I missing?
I love that. Okay, that's actually a really good takeaway for me. My goal this season was to like learn something every episode, and that's the thing I just learned this episode, because I'm gonna go ask, what am I missing? Okay, in our last few minutes together, which is sad, but I have to respect your timeline and make sure I get this done on time. I always like to wrap with like advice and future. We just gave some mistakes and advice, but I do want to ask. This is a very interesting question. I've been waiting all episode to ask this. If you could rewrite one aspect of how stories are told in corporate spaces, what would it be?
I think in a time where we are curating education, I wish that we would link back to the why, whether that's a resource, like how did we get here? Because I do believe in corporate work, we have some form of short-term memory loss. Everyone seems to act like this has never happened before. And if you go through the history of the company, I'm sure you can find a moment where it actually did. So I want to rewrite us feeling like we're in like Groundhog Day, because employees feel that way sometimes too. Leaders might not feel that, but employees be like, yes, in the great layoff of 2022, I remember these comms, right? And I remember what this happened. Like
I remember these comms.
I remember these comms. So they know, like they're perceptive. I wish we could rewrite how leaders feel like everything is just like a brand new thing and this has never happened before. Because it has. Nothing is original.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good point. I mean, I when I was thinking about this question, I was like dire to ask you, because my right now obsession has been like these return to work mandates where companies are like, they're going to be better for collaboration. And then every time I post about it, somebody's like, how? And I'm like, actually, we all learned like we were more productive at home, and collaboration like did happen. I don't know why they think we have to physically look at each other for collaboration to happen. And we know with a lot of these return to work mandates, like people are going in the office to get on Zoom to collaborate with someone. So I don't know if this is like a wish for corporate storytelling, but like I just wish companies would be honest about what is actually driving their return to work.
That real estate line item is really driving you crazy, and it's a red line. And just say that. I
would respect everyone more if they said we're going back to the office 5 days a week because we have this corporate office space that is very expensive, that is a budget line item on our budget, and we must make use of it. I would respect that 15 million times more than hearing one more company claim collaboration and teamwork is better in person.
This goes back to what I said, get better writers. Honestly, because your story, cancel this season of RTO. Like, it's just not even working. Like,
cancel it. We're not renewing you. You didn't make it. See ya.
The season of like the anti-DEI and the RTO, because they're connected. Cancel this whole season. Whoever gave you these talking points, you need to fire them. You need to start over from scratch and actually, because I think they really do believe us versus them. They believe that employees are not as perceptive as they actually are. And sometimes they are. And sometimes they don't have all the information, because I am passionate about people who come into work and don't know all the politics behind the scenes. Like I'm passionate about exposing that. But at the end of the day, if you give them the information, they're adults. They can process it and figure it out.
And they would probably respect you more. I made a TikTok about this that like went baby viral, and people were saying the exact same thing. Like, it's because they need to use the office space. I'm like, why do you not think that we are intelligent enough to read between the lines? Yeah. That's the one thing I wish I could change about corporate storytelling. And like, sometimes I do get feedback that I'm like too transparent, because I'm like, just tell the employee why we're doing this. Because it's like, if
secret, they know
they're talking to each other. They are not stupid. They know. So just tell them. Like, it just does such a disservice if you're in an organization that's like trying to skirt around saying the hard thing. What's that Brene Brown quote I say all the time? Clear is kind. Just be clear.
Yes.
Just be clear.
Yep. When she does that 3 dots for the iPhone, and you like, when you say something to someone and then they're texting you back, but it's just like the 3 dots, and then it gets erased, and then it's 3 dots, and then it gets, all the stories you're telling yourself in between. She did that when I saw her live, and she's like, you're telling, how many stories are people telling themselves? So that's exactly what's happening. People are starting to fill the story in for themselves. And then at that point, the narrative is broken. It's gone. It's fan fiction at this point. Like, you're not even like,
hey, I love fanfic. Okay. It's made me really rethink Harry Potter canon.
Employees are probably doing really great fan fiction about RTO and anti-DEI. I think it's great.
Oh my God, that's such a good point, because truly, okay, I'm going to end on this, and I'm so sorry for anybody who does not read fanfic, but you need to read fanfic. It has changed how I thought about Harry Potter. Like, I read, this is really dorky, and if you think I'm a dork for doing this, joke's on you, because fanfic's really good. But I read Hermione fanfic, which is Draco and Hermione end up together. And it's made me rethink how they treated Hermione throughout the entire book. I'm like, she was so smart, top of her class. She got them out of every single situation. And these fools should have worshipped the ground she walked on. And they did not appreciate her as much. And so fanfic has made me like deeply appreciate her. It's actually made me like Harry and Ron less. It's made me like rethink characters and why they would do things. And I'm like, this is just fanfic written by fans who wanted to tell a different story. And our employees are fanfic writers. They're literally telling different stories. And if we are not clear and do not show what we are trying to say, our employees will write their own fanfic about us.
They will. And that's when you get into employer branding, and we get that pendulum of great resignation, great, like
quiet quitting,
quitting. All of the stories come out because, again, it goes back to companies in corporate America has a short-term memory loss issue. And like, people are going to fill in the blanks however they want to.
That's it. That's a wrap. That's where we're going to mic drop there. We are going to mic drop there. Tara, everyone's on LinkedIn. That's how they can find you, right?
They can find me on LinkedIn. They can go to my website, Equity Activations, and I'm launching a resource, not a newsletter.
A resource.
It's specifically on how we can build a better workplace together. I'm not interested in just HR people talking to each other, but I want people who are entering the workplace, who have questions, people who contribute to work, period. So we're going to build it together.
I love it. I posted about it on my LinkedIn, and I'll link it in the show notes. And thank you so much for being here. You are truly one of my favorite people to talk to. And there's so much power in storytelling. And I hope this episode inspires people to go out and find out how they can be better storytellers so their employees aren't writing fanfic about them.
Same.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. Keep up with all the latest HR resources by subscribing on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen. And if you love I Hate It Here, tell an HR friend. I'll see you next time.